It's supposed to be one of the best times of your life, but the Archbishop of Canterbury has expressed deep concern about the pressures on children in today's society.
Dr. Owen Williams says that early testing in schools and aggressive advertising techniques are causing a crisis in childhood, with 1 in 10 children apparently suffering mental health problems.
Well, to discuss this a little further, we can speak to Cathy Evans, who's Assistant Director for Policy at the Children's Society, which is launching an inquiry into the state of modern childhood, and also to Nicky Cox, Editor of First News, a newspaper for 8 to 14-year-olds. Cathy, first of all, how worried should we really be about our kids?
Well, I think the issue is that many people just are worried, and certainly in launching our inquiry, we're not looking to paint a picture of panic. But there are clearly some very genuine issues about which people are concerned and about which we should be somewhat concerned. Evidence of increasing rates of depression and anxiety among young people. It appears certainly that while we've increased wealth and living standards have increased for the vast majority of the population, that isn't translating into greater happiness for children. So what we want to do is to actually have an inquiry to make sure that we can bring all of these different bits of evidence, these different concerns which continue to come up in the media on a regular basis, bring them all together, make sure that we've got the perspectives of children and young people themselves, the people who are really experiencing childhood today, and their parents, adults who have strong views about that. We really want to get everyone around the issue of trying to paint an accurate picture. Let's not get caught up in panic, but let's not ignore some serious issues that are there as well.
What do you think about this, Nicky Cox? Is it possible to paint a broad picture of how children feel today? Because presumably children from different backgrounds are having very different experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that things are very different from when I was young and, you know, when all of us were young. I think children have always had anxieties. When I was young, I think it was the ozone layer. I was concerned about this hole in the ozone layer and CO2 and gases, and that, you know, we were all going to be dead within a few years' time. And nowadays that's closing up, and that's not a concern at all. And I think today children have other worries. You know, they are worried about terrorism, they're worried about road safety, they're worried about crime. Things sort of actually a little bit distant from their lives, but in a survey that we've just done, their own lives they actually seem to be quite happy about. 92% of them told us that they were happy with their education. 80% of them told us that they thought they had a healthy diet. In their own world, they actually seem to be quite happy to me.
But Cathy Evans, I mean, do you not think we're overly worried about children, and that we're stressing out too much about their stress? And actually, Lord Winston was saying a bit earlier on that you know, chimney sweeps, 13-year-old chimney sweeps, well, they were pretty stressed back in Victorian times. So, you know, in some ways, our children now have never had it so good.
Well, we're certainly not looking to say, and certainly not at the beginning of this inquiry, we're not looking to simplistically say it's all better or worse. And it may well be that what we really need to grasp is that adults are over-anxious about children. That may be one of the key issues, whereas children themselves are not as worried about that. They do think they have a good life. All of those possibilities about why is it that we have so many media stories covering things from antisocial behaviour and increases in youth crime to overeating and lack of play, too much new technology, or the benefits of new technology. We are extremely concerned about children, and so we should be. They are our collective next generation. But it may well be that we need to confront our own over-anxiety about children, and that will be part of what we'll look at in the inquiry. It's not simply about saying it's all better or it's all worse, but it is very timely to say what's going on.
It's an interesting point, actually, Nicky, about our parents too anxious these days, because there's just a wealth of books around that simply weren't around possibly for the previous generation. We do agonise about how we're bringing up our children. Do you think that is one of the problems?
Absolutely. We're all being told how to parent these days in a way that I don't think we ever were. So I think the anxiety is definitely the parents about their children rather than the children themselves.
It was Dr. Spock in the 60s, wasn't it? I think that was all there was.
I mean, it's part of the problem that we're overprotective. I mean, we see all these horrible stories about child murders. We want to keep our children at home. That means they end up sitting in the bedroom on a PlayStation or something, when maybe in the old days they would have been running around just playing with their friends without us worrying about them.
Well, I think that there's overprotectiveness, and I think there's just some straightforward conflicting messages. So young people hear us being extremely worried about them being out in a way that perhaps I was allowed to be out when I was a child with my friends. My parents didn't know exactly where I was, but they gave me the freedom to go out and play. And perhaps many more parents are anxious about that kind of behaviour because they're feeling protective towards their children. And at the same time, we hear very panicked reactions about young people hanging around on the streets, and that's a threat to adults, and that they are the dangerous ones,
so
not
sort
the
of
ones
too
at
many
risk.
mixed messages, really.
I think there are a lot of mixed messages. Do we want them at home, safe with their family, away from the public realm? Do we want them out in the public, playing and making noise, which is what children and young people do? There are a lot of conflicting messages, and people, I think, will value an inquiry which is intended to bring all of that together and see whether we can find a way through it that makes a bit more sense.
Ultimately, Nicky, obviously all parents want to do is bring their children up in the best possible way and make them as happy as possible. What advice would you give? Because you have carried out a pretty in-depth survey of how children feel.
I think to talk to them, actually, and to listen to them. I think there's a lot of parental anxiety about the internet and all those things because it's new to us. It's not new to them. They've grown up with it, and I think they're actually a lot more comfortable about it than we are. So talk to them and listen to them.
Okay, well, thank you both very much indeed. Cathy Evans and Nicky Cox, thank you for coming in and discussing some of those issues with us.